to the Mission Dorothy podcast with your hostess, Tamekis Williams. Hello, and thank you so much for joining us here today at the Mission Dorothy podcast. So I hope you guys had a fantastic weekend if you are listening to this right after I upload. And if you're listening to this any other day, I hope that you guys are doing well. And I hope that your day is going great. So this is part 3 of our series when it comes to boundaries. And, thus far, I hope that part 1 and part 2 has been very helpful to you guys when it comes to setting boundaries in your own life. Right. And so, we've discussed a lot so far, right? We've talked about what are boundaries, and we looked at the difference between rigid boundaries as well as loose boundaries, right? And so we talked about different types of boundaries when it comes to your physical, your sexual, your intellectual, your emotional, and your financial. And so we talked about those 5 different types of boundaries individually as well in part 2. And so here in part 3, we're going to talk about the difference between, we're going to talk about personal boundaries. And we're also going to talk about 10 ways to set and maintain your boundaries as well. All right. And so then we will wrap it up with also recognizing the boundaries of others. And so let's dive right on in. And so, as I stated, I hope you guys have really been putting this work to use. We all can benefit from getting a clear understanding when it comes to boundaries. And whether it's personal or whether it is setting boundaries with those that are in your life as well. And so I hope that you guys have, started to really take a look at your own boundaries when it comes to your physical boundaries, your sexual boundaries, intellectual boundaries, emotional boundaries, and financial boundaries, right? And so I want you to really be mindful of that. And I just want to add like a little caveat to that. And that is, I just want you guys to really be mindful of, if we go all the way back to the 6 pillars of self-esteem and looking at living consciously, we have to really be mindful of setting boundaries when it comes to distractions, right? And negative distractions. We're talking about social media. We're talking about, I'm sorry, I just had a little brain, my brain just went blank. Okay, we're talking about social media, we're talking about telephone, we're talking about procrastination, perfectionism, right? We're talking about those negative distractions that we also may need to set boundaries with. Also looking at other behaviors within us, right? Going back to, just personal boundaries, right? With yourself when it comes to any negative behaviors that you may have that you need to work on, right? And that you need to set boundaries when it comes to drinking, when it comes to any drug use, when it comes to cursing, any of those things that are in your life that you feel you want to let go of or need to let go of, or maybe causing some major issues in your life like perfectionism, procrastination, using avoidance, anger, those types of things as well. So I definitely want you to be mindful of those setting boundaries when it comes to negative distractions as well. So when we look at personal boundaries, we need to understand that boundaries are basically, protocols that you put in place in order to separate your feelings from someone else's, right? That goes back to those people pleasers, those yes men and yes women, right? It is taking on other people's stuff. And so the goal here is to, with boundaries, you're separating your emotions from other people's emotions. And the good part about that is that you are giving people their responsibility back. And what I mean by that is that you're no longer taking on other people's responsibility. You're placing it right back in their lap, and you are walking away with what is your responsibility and nothing extra. Right. And so when we just think about just us naturally as humans, we want to take in consideration that, we have our own thoughts, we have our own beliefs, we have our own memories, we have our own life experiences, and we don't want to blur that with somebody else's stuff. Right. So boundaries is just a healthy way of helping you to identify and put space in between your feelings, your stuff, and somebody else's stuff, right? And so when we think about, like if we were to think about physical boundaries, right? So when our physical boundaries are crossed, we have to rely on our own internal systems to alarm us, to let us know that our physical boundaries have been crossed, right? Our emotional boundaries have been crossed. Our psychological boundaries have been crossed, right? And so as an example, in that psych article that I'm referencing, it says, if you come away from a meeting or a telephone conversation with friends, family, or anyone feeling depleted, anxious, wound up, there are probably boundaries that have been breached, right? There may be boundaries that have been breached. So think about this again. If you're having a conversation with someone and you tend to walk away from that conversation, whether it's friends, family, coworkers, and you're feeling depleted, you're feeling anxious or wound up, you're feeling, taken advantage of, you're feeling that feeling of, oh my God, I just signed up to do something else, the feeling of overwhelmed, then probably you did not do a good job with setting boundaries in that conversation, right? So setting boundaries is definitely beneficial. It's really beneficial when it comes to just defining our own identity, right? When having them in place, it limits your exposure to stress and the body's production of adrenaline and that stress hormone cortisol, right? And so basically you're protecting your own well-being. You're protecting your own mental well-being by setting those boundaries, because when we get stressed, right, we will produce adrenaline. So we get worked up, anxious, and then we start to produce that cortisol, which is a hormone, and it's the stress hormone. And for women, ours is released right around our midsection, which is our stomach area, right? And so for some women, they may diet, they may work out, and cannot lose that gut, and so two places you need to look: drinking, right? Because alcohol sits in the gut, especially beer. But secondly, stress, right? It's the cortisol. That cortisol is being released every time you're stressed. So if you live a high stressful life, then therefore, it can sit right there in that gut area, right? And so, that's one consequence of not setting boundaries, right? It's a health issue. Secondly, it's a mental, emotional issue because you start to feel overwhelmed. You're, already feeling like you have too much on your plate as it is. Then you start to have those feelings of guilt if you go back to say no, or actually I can't do it. And it just spirals out of control, right? And you are left feeling, some kind of hurt, pain, overwhelmed, just negative emotions, right? And so, The goal with boundaries is showing that you are in control as much as possible when it comes to what you want and what you don't want to do. That, boundaries, that's just that, right? It helps you to be in control of your time. It helps you to be in control of your space. It helps you to be in control of your body. It helps you to be in control of your finances, your emotions, right? Your relationships. And so boundaries are very important, as we can see, when it comes to our mental well-being, physical well-being, and emotional well-being, right? And so boundaries can also keep you safe in relationships, right? Whether it's personal, professional, romantic. And that's really important, because those are the places where we tend to allow boundaries to just kind of be all over the place, is in our relationships, when it comes to our profession, when it comes to our family, and then our romantic relationships, right? And so we want to definitely make sure that we're doing a good job with setting those boundaries, because as we can see, there are definitely repercussions there. And so, when we look at a little research, research also shows that blurred boundaries, right? Those boundaries that are not as clear when it comes to work and home life are linked to unhealthier lifestyles and lower level of happiness, along with a high risk of family conflict. So you want to get yours in order, right? You want to make sure that those boundaries are clear, right? That the person walks away understanding that you have set clear boundaries. They get it. They understand it. There's no questions. No, I cannot do it, period. That's clear. So when the person walk away, they understand that you cannot do it. You cannot partake, right? And so you definitely want to make sure that your boundaries are clear and that they are not blurry, right? Clear, specific boundaries, not shady, blurred, murky, like clear. Okay? Clear boundaries, y'all. All right. So we've been able to see, the negatives when it comes to personal boundaries and when you're not doing a good job at setting those boundaries and making sure that they are clear. We just reviewed, that there are some health when it comes to mental and emotional health issues that can be caused due to not setting boundaries as well. So let's dive into the 10 ways to set and maintain good boundaries. So make sure you have your pencil and your paper to take notes. All right. So as we get started with these 10 ways to set and maintain boundaries, understand that it's key that you understand why each boundary you set is important to you, right? You want to also think about how will it benefit your emotional and mental well-being. So anytime you're stuck with setting a boundary, ask yourself these 2 questions. If I don't set this boundary, it will blank, 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 right? If I don't set this boundary, I will feel blank, blank, blank. So you're going to finish those sentence stems, right? So if I don't set this boundary, this will happen. If I do set this boundary, this could happen, right? If my boundary is not clear, this could also happen. So finish those 3 sentence stems, right? It's because it's important for you to understand why that boundary is important to you. The more you understand, the more you can identify its importance, the more adamant you're going to be about setting it. Okay? So when you can see, well, my emotional health will be fantastic once I set this boundary, right? My physical health is going to be good once I set this boundary, right? So make sure that you really sit with that, right? Because anytime we feel uncomfortable about something, that defense mechanism kicks in and then we can use avoidance and back off of it. Boundaries is not going to always feel good, especially to the other person that you're setting the boundary in, for, right? They're going to feel like you're changing. They don't know who this new person is. They may feel like they did something wrong. So for the people that are in your life, when you set boundaries with the people that are closest to you, help them understand why you're setting that boundary. That way they won't have all of these scrambled thoughts about what's going on and what is this change in our relationship. If you know that you've been the yes ma'am in a relationship, when you say no, things are going to shift. That person is going to feel a certain way. They're going to look at you differently. And so, sometimes it can help having that initial conversation when it comes to helping them understand why you are setting the boundary that you are setting. Okay? And that way they won't be caught off guard. And I'm talking about people that, that you're in relationships with. This is family. This is friends. This is, the coworkers, supervisor. But anybody outside of your immediate circle, you don't have to explain that. You don't have to. Just set the boundary. You don't have to explain that. Okay? All right. So think about it. Think about how you're going to feel on the other side of that boundary. Once it's in place, it's enforced, and it is regular. Right? Because you don't want to set boundaries and not be consistent. You want to be consistent. You have to be consistent. That is the key for allowing a boundary to work so that you can see progress. You have to be consistent. A lot of times people will set boundaries and will not be consistent when it comes to making sure that this person is not pushing past your boundary. You're holding them responsible for paying attention and respecting your boundary. So make sure that you are keeping consistency in front when it comes to your boundaries. Because if you are not consistent with setting them, people will not be consistent with following them because they're going to think that you're playing and you're teaching them how to behave when it comes to you and your boundaries. Okay? So as we talk about the 10 steps, that's that first one. It is, the first one is be consistent. Right? I just talked about that. Be consistent. Letting your boundaries slide can lead to confusion and encourage new expectations and demands among those around you. Right? So here you are trying to set one boundary, but they're pushing for new expectations and new demands. No, boo-boo. Set that boundary. Okay? Set the boundary. And that way, when you set the boundary, when you are consistent about holding them accountable, when you are consistent about setting your boundary and keeping it there, then it will reduce new expectations and demands. Right? So make sure that you are being consistent. Okay? So try keeping things consistent and steady. This will help to reinforce your original threshold and beliefs, and it ensures those lines remain clearly established. Right? So, number 1, be consistent when you set your boundary. Number 2, set them early. Set them early. Right? So sometimes it can be really hard to start putting boundaries in, especially in pre-existing relationships, as I discussed, right? Why? Because if that relationship is already pre-existing, like I said, everybody who's on the receiving end of your boundary is not going to be happy about the change, right? Think about it. If you've been in therapy and you started to break some negative behaviors negative behaviors in your relationships, people wasn't always happy about it, were they? No, they were not. Right? So it's the same thing with boundaries. Make sure that you set them early in the relationship. That way you ward off people thinking that they can take advantage of you, that you're a yes ma'am or a yes sir, that, they can just push their agenda on you. Nope. You set that boundary early in that relationship so that people can understand the dynamics of the relationship. Okay? All right. So number 1 is be consistent. Number 2, you set the boundaries early. The earlier you set them, the less frustrated you will feel, the less confused the other person will feel, and you will save yourself some emotional pain. Okay? So set those boundaries early in relationships. This goes back to when we think about relationships, especially romantic relationships, but you can look at this in your friendships too. Have a conversation with yourself and sit and assess what you want in your relationships, romantic or friendship. What do you want? That way, when you walk into a new relationship, you already know what you want, and those wants can come with the boundaries. So you go ahead and set those boundaries early so that this relationship starts off with healthy boundaries. Now, I'm not talking about negative boundaries, but it starts off with healthy boundaries from the jump, right? Okay. All right. So third, create a framework, much like what I just said, right? So it all depends on your relationships, the type of relationship that you have, right? Boundaries vary depending on the type of relationships. But however, if you find it helpful, there's no reason not to have a few basics in place that can be adapted accordingly. So consider getting an hour or 2 of alone time each weekend, right? So this is a boundary that you want to set. You want to get at least 2 hours. This is an example. I'm sorry. So here's an example of creating a framework. So you consider getting an hour or 2 of alone time each weekend. This boundary could apply whether you live with a partner, have a busy social schedule with friends, or are close with your family, right? So setting that framework is you taking out the time to go ahead and set that 2-hour block time. So you're going to go ahead on your calendar. You're going to block off that hour or 2 that you want for yourself. That's a boundary. Boom. Right? That's why I say, in sessions, sometimes I talk about for my clients, the importance of writing out that calendar so you can see where that blank time is, right? So that you can see, hey, you know what? I have an extra hour or 2. Like right now, I'm doing this podcast episode. Today is Tuesday. It is 2:00. Now, 2:00 is usually my lunch time. But I realized that I did not upload a new episode on Monday. I just didn't have the time. And so I'm like, you know what? I got this break. Let me go ahead and get this episode in so that I can upload it. And then I can move on with the rest of my day. Right. So I ate breakfast. I ate a hearty breakfast. So therefore, it freed up this lunchtime for me. Right. So therefore, anytime I have breaks on my schedule, I will write in what I want to do during that time. So that's a boundary. That means that during that time, nothing else will get any attention except for what I've scheduled to do during that little hour block, right? And so, setting the framework is that I already have the habit of utilizing a calendar, right? And on my calendar, when I have free time, I go ahead and assign tasks for that free time if I have some other things that I want to do. So that's a framework, right? That is something that I've put in place and I use it on a regular basis, right? So if you're trying to set a boundary of getting some self-care or some quality time with yourself, then set that boundary and say, hey, every Saturday from 7 to 8, that's just my hour that I'm going to sit down and just kind of focus on me. That's when I'm going to give me some thought, right? Everybody else is on hold. The family is on hold. Work is on hold. Everything else is on hold. I am using this time for me, right? So that is what this means by setting the framework. Okay, so that's number 3 of ways to set and maintain good boundaries. You got your framework in order. Another framework is being clear when it comes to your negotiables and non-negotiables in your relationships. So if you've already sat down with yourself and you said, self, girl, okay, so what's our non-negotiables in relationships? What are those things that we are not dealing with, period? Right? What are our non-negotiables? What are our negotiables? What are those areas and things, topics that we're willing to kind of negotiate? Those are negotiables. Right? So that's a framework. I sat down, I came up with my negotiables and my non-negotiables. Now I can take that and apply that when I set my boundaries. So I'm creating boundaries related to my non-negotiables. Right? So that's a framework, right? Like that is a framework. That's an example of a framework. And so I want you to understand that a framework, if you were to look at the definition, framework is a set structure in which tasks are performed and completed. Right? So that's what we mean by make sure that you create a framework for how you're going to set these boundaries. Okay? All right. So that's our first 3. Be consistent, number 1. Set them early, number 2. And create a framework, number 3. Number 4, feel free to add extras. So in some aspects of our lives, there are boundaries already in place, right? Such as the workplace, such as when it comes to laws. But we need to understand that those that are already set into place, these are minimum, right? And so colleagues will likely have some of their own in place, and it's okay for you to add some too. So basically what this is saying is that when you set a boundary, or let's just say if there's a natural boundary. Natural boundaries are boundaries that are already set in place. So laws is a natural boundary, right? Your colleagues will have their own boundaries. You can't control that. So that's a natural boundary, right? And so you can always take that natural boundary and then add some little mini boundaries to it, right? So by doing this, this can enhance your ability to set boundaries and strengthen your boundaries, right? So if we think about it, like when you set boundaries on the job, you tend to be a little bit more happier on the job, right? You're a little bit less stressed because you've set those boundaries. And what is getting on Kim's nerve at work is not touching you because you've already set boundaries and Kim didn't. So when we think about feel free to add extras, you can add you can add to the boundary, right? If you have a boundary that's in place and over time things have changed, the relationship have changed, feel free to add extras to that boundary, right? Sometimes it has to be adjust. So please note this. Boundaries, even though you want to put them in place and let them be fixed, they are still adaptable. So you can still go in and make some changes. All right. So feel free to add extras to the boundaries you may already have set, or if there are natural boundaries there, then just like this example, your colleagues may already have their own boundaries in place. So then you can come in and add to that boundary on your terms, right? So the colleague has their boundaries in place, and then you can come in and add some boundaries to that, right? So that is number 4, feel free to add extras. Number 5, be aware of social media when it comes to boundaries. Oh my goodness, right? So when we think about social media is out there so that we can communicate with each other in so many extra ways outside of just a telephone, right? And so, but the thing about social media is that we already know social media, honey, the boundaries is blurred, murky. They're all over the place. Some of your boundaries may not be strong enough. Some of the boundaries can be weak, like you got to be really strict when it comes to social media. And please, especially in your romantic relationship, Lord Jesus, please make sure that you and your mate have clear boundaries set, right? Y'all have had the conversation. You guys have come up with, ways of making sure that your boundaries are, you've had the conversation about social media. You guys have worked together to come up with agreeable boundaries. You guys have agreed to set those boundaries into place. Those boundaries are into place, and you guys are upholding those boundaries and making sure that no one is pushing past them, right? So please be mindful. Social media, definitely you have to have boundaries set there. Also, when we talk about social media, I think we've all seen it on Facebook where people just overshare, right? They may get into it with their mate. They go to Facebook and they just blurt out all of their feelings as it relates to an argument that them and their mate got into, and they will put all of their business out there on social media. Then now all your friends looking at your mate sideways, y'all made up, but your friends are still stuck in what you put on Facebook. So please be mindful of oversharing boundaries when it comes to social media, right? Also, let's think about your settings with all of your social media accounts, going in your security settings, going in your settings and setting boundaries when it comes to who can post, who can embed this video, who can, leave a comment, who can see my pictures. So make sure that you're utilizing those settings to set boundaries. That's another way of setting boundaries, right? So make sure that you go in that social media in your account profile and go in there and set those boundaries, honey, because it's needed, right? So, you want to be really mindful when it comes to social media and setting boundaries, because once we put it out there, it's out there. Even if we deleted it, it's still out there somewhere stored. Okay? So if you deem a particular action as boundary crossing in your real life, your concerns are no less valid when it occurs digitally. You don't have to expose yourself to social media that's distressing you, right? So you don't have to put all your stuff out there on social media. You don't. You don't have to put all your business out there on social media. You don't have to put all your feelings out there on social media. Some of that stuff you really need to keep to yourself. You understand what I'm saying? So make sure that you set boundaries when it comes to your social media. Okay? Please. I have read this article of this girl. Y'all know, do it for the gram, right? Do it for the gram. I read this article on this girl, and this girl, I think she was in like, $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 in debt, all for the gram, right? So this girl is going on trips and buying clothes and all this expensive stuff. Why? So just so she could take a picture and put it on the gram, right? So she did not set a couple of boundaries. She didn't set boundaries with herself when she started this whole Instagram profile. She did not set financial boundaries when it came to her spending. She did not set any personal boundaries when it comes to working to try to become an influencer. And now here she is with this beautiful Instagram page, but the girl is sitting in debt. Okay, so she needed to set some personal boundaries there that she did not. So please set boundaries when it comes to social media. And also, please teach that to your children, right? Because, kids they'll put their whole life on social media, the whole life, right? So just make sure that you talk with them about boundaries when it comes to social media. And you may want to set some natural boundaries for them because, their brain is still developing. So therefore, they're not going to be able to come up with all the boundaries that they should set. So that's where you come in as the parent to help them understand why and what boundaries they need to consider. All right. So that's 6 I think I've covered. So we started with set them early, number 1. Number 2, start small. 3, be consistent. 4, create a framework. 5, feel free to add extras. 6, be aware of social media. 7 is communication. Now, we got to be mindful. People can't expect, so a lot of times, you should have known. No, as they say, assuming it makes an ass out of you and me. Okay? Clear boundaries. Clear. So when we think about communication is key and critical when it comes to boundaries, especially if someone consistently oversteps yours. While you might need to raise your concerns, these discussions need not to be confrontational. So, as you work to set your boundaries, you have to communicate the boundary. Can't just set it and think that the person is going to automatically understand that you set a boundary. No. Communicate your boundaries so that people are clear about what your boundary is, especially those who know you set the boundary, but keep trying to push past it. Now, don't get upset, right? I mean, some situations may cause a little anger, but keep your cool because at the end of the day, you have control in setting your own boundaries as well as holding that person responsible for not pushing past your boundaries. That's if you are not a people pleaser or a yes ma'am, yes sir type of person. Because if you are those types, then you may allow them to push past your boundaries. But we are working to get you out of that, right? So we talked about that in part 2. So make sure, when people keep pushing past your boundaries, you stay firm and pushing back by recalling to that person that you have that boundary set. You got every right to hold that boundary up and to make sure that people are not pushing past your boundaries. Okay? So for example, let's just say you have a friend who sends messages nonstop. Now you can text them back and say, honey, can you stop sending all these messages? I'll reply when I have time, right? Or, okay, you keep blowing up my phone. Can you please chill? Right? No, we don't want to handle the boundary there. Just a little while ago, I had a customer rep from a company that I was using their fax, and I've ended my relationship with that fax company and started one with a new company. And the guy, I was in session and he kept hanging up and calling, hanging up and calling, hanging up and calling. And so I had to email him to let him know that I am a therapist. I am in session. Please just leave a voicemail. Don't keep hanging up and calling, because if I didn't answer on the first go, I'm not going to answer on the third or fourth go either. Leave the voicemail and I'll call you back. That was me setting a boundary, nice, professionally. Right? Now, that's how I should have did it. But y'all, I did not, okay? What I really sent was, I sent him an email, and in the email, I said, what did I say? In the email, I said, I said, hi. I said, I was with the client while you continuously called. And that was my reply to his email, because he emailed me. Not only did he blow up my phone a couple of times, then he also emailed me to 2 of my email accounts. You talking about bugaboo, my God. But that was my reply to him. I said, hi, I was with the client while you continuously called. I gave him the information that he needed. Boom, done. Now, I was still nice about it, but I did throw that word in, continuous, while you continuously called. Just to let him know, like, okay, I see you calling, but apparently I'm busy. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah. So we want to be nice about it, right? But sometimes you got to put a little heat behind that boundary, because people will think you are playing, and it's like, okay, I'm going to have to show you I ain't playing. Now, I don't mean go out there and get to fighting and all that craziness, but I just mean so you can stand firm by using the right words. You don't have to holler, yell, cuss, scream. But you can use the right words in order to reinforce your boundaries and to let the person know that you don't appreciate them pushing past your boundaries. So you want to communicate properly, right? And so in this example, let's just, like, your friend keep calling. Your friend keeps sending you text messages nonstop, right? And you can answer ugly, or you can say, I can see you really wanted to get a hold of me, but the best thing to do is drop me a message by email. And I'll get back with you as soon as I can, right? So instead of them continuously blowing up your phone, hey, just shoot me an email or just leave me a voice message and I'll call you back as soon as I can, right? This is it gentle. We want to be gentle, right? So it highlights their behavior, but it also lets them know, hey, I see you, but I'll get back with you as soon as I can. Right now, I'm a little busy. Okay. So remember, communicate your boundaries. Let the person know, hey, this is my boundary. I'm asking you to respect it. Boom. Right? Don't set boundaries and assume that somebody is going to know that you put a boundary in place. No, they're not mind readers. So you have to communicate your boundaries, and don't be afraid to communicate your boundaries. You have the right to set boundaries. Just make sure that they are not rigid or too loose, right? You want to set healthy boundaries. Okay. So if you don't know what I mean, go back to episode 1 and 2 to gain some clarity. All right. I'm sorry. Episodes part 1 and part 2 when it comes to boundaries. All right. So next, be your biggest cheerleader. Okay. Be your biggest cheerleader. What this means is, in order for your boundaries to have a strong foundation, you need to show yourself a bit of love. Right? You got to be your biggest cheerleader. You got to also hold yourself responsible, but also show yourself some love. Have a little compassion for yourself as you set your boundaries, as you learn how to set boundaries. And, because if you're not used to setting boundaries, then it's going to feel a little hard. You know what I'm saying? So make sure you have some compassion for yourself when you do this. So think about this. If you have a narrative in your head that says you're worthless and undeserving, then you're going to find it difficult to put boundaries in place that protect you. Right? And that, it comes from your low self-worth and self-value. Right? And so it doesn't take much to start encouraging this type of mindset either. Right? And so we got to be mindful. When we show ourselves self-love, self-worth, the more self-worth you have, the stronger you're going to be with setting boundaries and being consistent about them. Why? Because you're protecting yourself. You're protecting your emotional and your mental and your physical well-being. So the more you see your value, the more you know your value, the more you love yourself, the more you're going to want to set boundaries. Right? The more you're going to want to set boundaries. If you have low self-esteem and low self-worth, then it's going to be hard for you to set boundaries because you're going to feel like you're not worth it. See, y'all, I'm telling y'all, a lot of this, it comes back to self-esteem and self-worth. Right? So sit and think about that. You got to be your biggest champion by having self-compassion, by having self-love, and by understanding your own value. The more self-love you have, self-worth, the more you understand your value, the better you will be when it comes to setting boundaries. Right? So be your biggest cheerleader. Cheer yourself on as you work to set these boundaries. Okay? Pat yourself on the back, girl, you did good. When you set the boundary, when you recognize that someone is respecting your boundary, thank them. Right? And then pat yourself on the back. Because I know that setting boundaries is not easy. Trust, I'm a therapist and I'm a human. Right? And so boundary setting is not always easy, but it's necessary. It's necessary for your own emotional, mental, and physical well-being. So make sure that you are your biggest cheerleader. And also remember, I said that, most of the times when you've allowed people to cross your boundaries, it stresses you out. You release that cortisol. hormone, right? But I also want you to understand that the more good we do for ourselves, the better we feel, right? The better we feel about ourselves, the better we are in places and spaces. And, the easier it is to look ourselves in the mirror. All right? So understand that, people are not going to always be your cheerleader. They're not going to always be supportive. And you have to be okay with that. And you have to be able to learn how to validate yourself and stop looking for it from other people. Everybody is not going to be happy about your boundary setting. But that's okay, because guess what? They set boundaries in their life. But they're not happy because you have stopped them from getting something that they want. And you've stopped them from using and abusing you. Okay? So make sure you sit in this one here and think about that self-esteem and that self-worth. All right? So be your biggest cheerleader. Cheer yourself on. Have compassion. Have empathy. All right? All right. So let's see what we've covered thus far. We said that number 1 is set them early. Start small. Number 2. Be consistent is number 3. Create a framework. Number 4. Feel free to add extras. Number 5. Be aware of social media. Number 6. Communicate. Number 7. All right. And so number 8 is gain some perspective. So what they mean by gain some perspective is not setting boundaries can be detrimental to our physical, mental, and emotional health. But going too far and overthinking them can also impact our emotional well-being. So perspective is understanding, right? So get a healthy level of thinking about boundaries. Get a healthy level of thinking. So what this means is have a healthy perspective when it comes to you and your boundaries. Understand why you are setting those boundaries. Okay? Be clear about why you are setting those boundaries. Gain some perspective. Gain some understanding. That's what that is saying, right? When you are setting those boundaries, understand why you're setting those boundaries. What are the benefits of setting those boundaries? Think about how you're going to feel once that boundary is in place. Think about what's going to be taken off your plate once that boundary is in place. Right? So be clear and have clear understanding about your boundaries, why you're setting them, and who you're setting them with. Right? And so clarity, clear understanding when it comes to setting your boundaries. Right? We don't want to just throw boundaries out there and then we don't understand, the benefits of it. Because we can throw boundaries out there and they can come back and hurt us. You understand? So it's good to have some good perspective. You got to sit down with yourself, go over that boundary, understand why you're setting that boundary, understand what you're going to do if the person push past your boundary, right? Understanding that there may need to be some tweaks to your boundaries that you may have set 6 months ago, right? So make sure that you gain some perspective. Be clear in your understanding of your boundaries, right? Assess, are my boundaries too rigid? Are they too loose? Or are they just right? Can this person, for some relationships, right? Your romantic relationship or family, but be mindful now, because having that understanding, make sure you check to see, does this person have the capability to understand my boundaries, right? And that can go when it comes to maybe the person has some sort of learning disability, right? Maybe it's their age, right? Developmental stage, and they don't get it. So, be mindful of that, right? Be clear about your boundaries, right? When you guys sit and you do your assessment, with the boundaries that you need to put in place, like when we finish this series or as you go throughout the series, I want you to be mindful and really sit and think about the boundaries that you've put in place, and just making sure that you are asking the right questions so that you have a clear perspective when it comes to your boundaries, how to set them, the benefits, what you're going to do if somebody push past it, and when to tweak it. All right? Clear understanding. I know I keep saying it, but it's so important, because if you're not clear about your boundary, the people that you're setting the boundary for may not be clear either. Okay? So gain some perspective, right? And so our last way of setting and maintaining good boundaries is enjoy some self-reflection, right? And so what this means is enjoy some self-reflection. This means to successfully introduce and set boundaries. It's key to understand, like I just spoke about, why they're each important to you and how they will benefit your emotional, mental, and physical well-being, right? I just kind of spoke about this here, right? And so, as I stated, setting boundaries can be uncomfortable. And when you're setting the boundary and you're feeling uncomfortable, go a little deeper and ask yourself, what's making me uncomfortable about setting this boundary? Write it out. Face it. Because I would rather for you to face it in your exploration stage instead of when you're standing in front of the person. Because if you wait until you're standing in front of the person, then this can reduce your chances of setting that boundary. Right? Especially if this person is aggressive, they know how to talk you into anything, they know how to push your buttons, they know how to shut you down. Right? So when you're in that exploratory phase of sitting down and thinking about the boundaries that you need to set, make sure that you are, like I said, asking yourself those questions that I list about 2 minutes ago, right? Why do I need to set this boundary? What are the benefits of the boundary? What if they don't respect my boundary? What are the consequences of pushing past my boundary? When do I think I may need to adjust my boundary? Is my boundary realistic? Does the person have the capabilities to carry out respecting my boundary? Right? That's during that self-reflecting, maybe going back, looking at the boundaries you already have in place, as well as new boundaries you want to set. Right? Clarity, consistency, intentionality, balance. Those are the 4 words I want you to make sure you write down and keep in mind when it comes to you setting boundaries. All right? So let's review. 10 ways to set and maintain good boundaries. Number 1, start small. Number 2, set them early. Number 3, be consistent. Number 4, create a framework. Number 5, feel free to add extras. Number 6, be aware of social media. Number 7, communicate. Number 8, be your biggest cheerleader. Number 9, gain some perspective or understanding. And number 10, enjoy some self-reflection, meaning be clear about your boundaries. Right? So those are 10 ways to set and maintain good boundaries. I hope you guys are taking notes. I hope you wrote them down. Please go back and come back and listen to this episode as many times as you need to. I really want you guys to get this. Okay? I really want you to really be able to set healthy boundaries. Please. Okay? This is part of learning how to live authentically. Right? We can't be authentic if we're not setting boundaries. Right? All right. So, lastly, I just wanted to talk about recognizing the boundaries of others. As we think about setting your own boundaries, it's important to appreciate those of others too. Right? Because as we set boundaries and we want people to respect our boundaries, we have to also respect other people's boundaries as well. Even if their boundaries are different from yours. Right? And so the question is, so how can you determine what another person's boundaries are? And how, I'm sorry. I'm getting tongue-tied here. What we want to do is pay attention, right? We want to pay attention to the do's and don'ts in other people, right? So if you have a friend, you want to pay attention to her do's and don'ts. You want to pay attention to how she responds to you. Because you can kind of see when the person's boundaries, right? Based off of sometimes their reaction, based off their conversation, their behaviors, right? Their communication to you. And if you're not clear, just ask, right? Just going back to our example earlier with the friend who just keeps sending the messages, right? So you could just say, you know what, can I message you later? Right? Or when is a good time to message you? Right? And so then there you're kind of starting to set up a framework. And this is you seeking to see what the boundary is for this person. Right? So if they come back and say, well, you know what? You can give me a call tonight after 7. Boom. Boundary. Don't call me before 7. Right? I'm not available until after 7. Like that's a simple, easy little boundary. Right? You want to use your common sense. If your partner hates using social media, there's a good chance they won't want those, couple selfies plastered all over the internet, right? I'm sorry, I'm just coming out of left field. So what I'm doing is I'm giving you an example of recognizing other people's boundaries. So if your partner does not like, let's just say your partner does not have an Instagram or Facebook. I hope y'all already had the conversation as it relates to why, right? And if they say, well, I just really don't like my business being out there. Boundary, that's them telling you right there that that's a boundary. I don't like my business being put out there. So every time you go to take the selfies and the couple, pics and all of that, remember, he don't like his business out there. So every time y'all go somewhere, you can't always put that stuff on Facebook. You need to ask him to respect his boundary, right? Hey, babe, I know you don't really like social media posting, but do you mind if I put a couple of pictures of us on Instagram? Here are the pictures I like to put up, right? This is you identifying his boundary that he don't like to put his business out in public. This is you asking him if it's okay for you to push past the boundary. And this is you getting his permission to put the information out there, right? So just kind of common sense. Don't just go throw stuff out there, because then you're sitting in an argument that could have been avoided if you would have respected his boundaries. Right? I don't like that. I had a friend and we went out one night, and the next day I went on social media and all the pictures was on, not all the pictures, but there was a lot of pictures on Facebook that I was not okay with, right? So I found myself calling her, And I thought I had already put it out there that I don't like, what I'm doing offline does not need to be put online, right? And so I had to call her and say, no, ma'am, take down picture 12, 14, 11, 6, 9. Basically, take all the pictures off of me. But I did give her a few photos that I was okay with. But I also set the boundary with her right then, right? I thought I had already put it out there, but maybe I didn't put it out there as clear. So I had to set the boundary then. Hey, when we go out, can you please either ask me first before you post anything related to me? And that's what she started doing moving forward, So I set the boundary and she respected that boundary. So if we went out or whatever, she would say, hey, can I put a picture of us on social media? Yeah. Which one you putting? This one. Okay, cool. Boom. Just like that. Right? So I set that framework. I set the framework. Hey, I don't like for what I do offline to be put online. Right? So it's all about, when we're trying to recognize the boundaries of others, it's paying attention, it's communicating, it's asking questions, it's using your common sense, it's listening, right? It's listening to your partner when they talk. Because we all communicate our boundaries. Sometimes they just may not be clear. Right. But we do feel like if we feel that you're listening, then we feel that you heard us when it comes to, us setting the boundaries. But that's not the healthiest way. You want to be clear about it. So when you set your boundary, communicate. And when you're trying to work to identify and respect other people's boundary, communicate. Right. A lot of arguments can be stopped if you listen, communicate, and pay attention. Think before you act. Right? That's it. Think before you act. Okay? So, this was a good one, y'all. I hope you guys are enjoying this series on boundaries. And so I just want you to understand, again, boundaries are essential to your mental, emotional, and physical health. Now, as we recap, as I stated, boundaries can be uncomfortable. People can think that you're being confrontational. You're being mean. You've changed. You think you better than them, all this and all that. But that's why it's good to have conversation. And everybody is not going to be pleased. And it's not about you trying to please everybody, right? It's about you working to set those boundaries in your life in order to protect your emotional, physical, and mental well-being, right? We don't want to be aggressive unless we need to, right? Like if you're in a unhealthy relationship, if you're, whether it's romantic or a friendship, and, you feel like your feelings keep being overlooked, or you feel like, this person is being disrespectful, or, then you got to set the boundary. But I want you to clearly understand that everybody is not going to be happy about your boundaries. But hey, that's the difference between setting boundaries in the middle of a relationship versus setting them at the beginning. But we're not here to please everybody, right? So if you can properly communicate your boundaries, it don't have to be forceful. Just state and uphold. State and uphold. You don't have to be aggressive or any of that unless it really causes for that. If you're in danger, you're in an unhealthy relationship, somebody is like taking what's the word I'm looking for? Advantage of you financially, but it's not going to always feel good. People aren't going to always be happy. But at the end of the day, you have every right to set your boundaries. I also want you to understand that you may feel some feelings of guilt, but setting boundaries is a form of self-love, self-care. It shows that you understand your self-worth and that you have self-value, right? So boundaries are essential, and you should not feel guilty about protecting you. Last, I want you to understand that boundaries, it takes time. It takes time if you're not used to doing it. It takes time for other people to get used to your boundaries. It takes time to be consistent, and it takes time to uphold and hold accountable, hold people accountable of respecting your boundaries as well. But guess what? Your mental, emotional, and physical self is going to thank you for setting those boundaries. Your future self is going to absolutely be so thankful that you set those boundaries. Okay? So, I hope that this was very helpful. Please take some time, some intentional time, undisturbed time to sit and listen to part 1, 2, and 3. I don't know, let me think about it, because this might be the last episode when it comes to boundaries. But if I come up with something else, please let me know. Or if you guys have any ideas for a part 4, if you feel like I've left something out, please feel free to message me, DM me on social media at Mission Dorothy. let me know. Okay. And if it's something that I feel will be beneficial, I will definitely come back with a part 4. But in the meantime, I need you to really take copious notes for part 1, 2, and 3. And also, I want you to please share this with anybody that you feel have issues with setting boundaries. Please send them the link to the podcast episodes. This podcast is on Apple, it's on Google, it's on Spotify. I think it's on Stitcher. It's on several different platforms. So please send them the link if you know someone who has issues with boundaries, right? This information, y'all, is free. Okay? So please share it with the people that you care about, because I just want to be able to help as many people as I can, right? Everybody can't sit on my couch. My beautiful blue couch. I miss y'all sitting in here with me. For my clients and old COVID, right? But everybody can't sit on my couch. And so that's why I do this podcast. Because I want this podcast to be an extension of the therapeutic services as well as the women's empowerment services that I give. I want this to be an extension for when we're not in session and you need some positivity or a positive word, or, a lot of times my clients will say, "Oh, Miss Williams, I heard you in my head," or "I just needed to hear something positive. You guys can come to this podcast and I'm trying to give you what you need," right? And so I'm trying to cover topics that I see in my clients out here in the world. When I talk to other therapists, I'm trying to give you guys information that you can use to transform your life for the better, right? So that you can have a better quality of life, right? I'm trying to teach you guys how to live authentic and walk in your shoes and be proud of it, proud of you. Okay. All right, y'all. That's it. That's all. I am out. Have a fantastic rest of your day. And I will see you in the next episode. Have a good one. Thank you so much for your time. Please feel free to leave me if my content is blessing you. Please don't hesitate to leave a review for me on Apple. I will greatly appreciate that. I would love to get my reviews up there. So please, if you feel that this podcast is helping you, please leave me a review on Apple. Okay? On Spotify, I don't think you can leave reviews. But also, if you look down in my show notes, you will see a link to where you can also leave me a voicemail. And you can leave your message there. If this podcast is helping you work through some things and enhancing your quality of life, you can definitely leave me a message there. And who knows, I may play it in a future episode. Also, you can also leave your positive comments there as well. And if there are any topics that you would like for me to cover or, to consider covering as well. So there should be a link there for you to be able to do that for me. Okay. All right, you guys, I'm out. Have a good one. Bye.